particular.
We've been on this journey, and it's been really fun. At least it has been from our end. And I would love to hear how it's been from your end. redhawkthedeepend@gmail.com. Again, we'd love to hear from you. We've got listeners all over the planet, and to be honest, I'd love to connect. And that connection is part of what I want to talk about today. We've talked about Einstein's quote, all separation is optical. All sense of separation is optical delusion. We've talked about Schleiermacher, talking about that we're all in the middle of one big superordinate happening. And we've talked about the journey between being, life, and consciousness. And we've talked about the three essential processes of differentiation, complexification, and here's the one today that's really important, semi-permeability. Now, we talk about the oneness of being, and that's what we're going to do today, and yet you seem to have this alleged autonomy, so do I. What's the relation between the two? How do we experience this balance between my individuality and this oneness of being? Think about this. You are composed and comprised of 84 minerals, 23 elements, and 8 gallons of water spread across 38 trillion cells. You've been built up from nothing by spare parts of the earth, and you have consumed, according to a set of instructions hidden in a double helix and small enough to be carried by a sperm, you are recycled butterflies, plants, rocks, streams, firewood, wolf fur, and shark teeth, all broken down to their smallest parts and rebuilt into our planet's most complex living thing. That's you, that's me. You see, you are not living on the earth. You are not, you didn't come into this world. You are the earth, and you came out of this reality, this conglomeration of being and life, and it gave rise to consciousness. There's a balance that we're looking for in my mind, and this is something, is my autonomy real? Well, it has very real, that's part of consciousness and the mystery of it, that there does seem to be a clear individuality of this organism. And yet there is also a seeping awareness that this organism is so intricately and intimately connected that, again, there's no way to separate where I stop and the world begins, because there is no place where I stop and the world begins. It's always amazed me the word Israel means to wrestle with God. And I think in one way we are all Israel on this holy land called planet Earth. And that's just the language I use. You can use any kind of language. But the human family is wrestling. And I think this is one of the points to me where wrestling is really important. Because as I've moved through my life as a mystic and as one who's sought to increase the oscillation between the center of my being and the oneness of being, I find that sometimes I become a voice for the one. Sometimes I become a vehicle. In other words, not just a speaking piece, but a doing piece. And sometimes I feel like I'm an embodiment of it. I can just sit and feel like it's embodied in me, that I am one wave rising out of the ocean and looking upon the whole ocean from the height of my wave and going, whoa, what a freaking trip. How do I connect myself, my intent? Dharma is another way, of talking about it. The truth of my being, the path of who I'm going to become, the most of who I can be. How do I connect all of that to this oneness in such a way that health happens? And that's really what we're looking for, I think, is what is healthy wholeness? How do we even define it? And I think our relationship between the oneness of being and our individuality in my lifetime has become something we can talk about now. I think it's always been there, but it's more the public conversation is more available, I would say. So I'm talking about today the balance between the individual and the oneness of being, and how do we manage that? Is it real? Is it just delusion? I don't think it is in any way, in my experience. So I want to thank my co-host up front, Mary Ann, coming from down in the valley of Spokane here, Washington State, and Bob over there in Florida in
state of confusion.
Yeah, there you go. In great confusion. God bless Floridians. Anyway, the oneness of being and the individual. How do we balance those, Bob? Is this a real issue in your life at all? Have you considered it, or is it just something that's happening?
Whether one considers it or not, it really is the major issue in everyone's life. We are born, and when we get to a certain age, we realize that we are separate from our parents, we're separate from our friends, we're separate from the world around us. And that is necessary to develop our self-concept, our consciousness, our ability to interact in the world. But that brings with it this negative side where we find this sense of separation frightening. We find it frustrating. We find that when we try to connect, we often are not able to. So it's something that we all struggle with during our lives. Some of us deny that struggle exists, whether we do that consciously or unconsciously. But it's, again, one of these paradoxes that we're always dealing with. In order to be a separate consciousness, we have to separate ourselves. But in order to feel fulfillment and to feel a purpose, we have to find out how to reconnect. And that's really the two-pronged journey of our lives, at least the way I see it.
Amen. Mary Ann, how about you? Where do you sit on this this dance between our individuality and the oneness of being?
Oh, it just continues to perplex me. But I kind of think of it in terms of, and Bob, I think you kind of talked about this a little bit, but our ego versus our spirit. So if we have a body, mind, and spirit, so there we do separate. And then we spend our entire lives figuring out what those components are, how they come together. We have these experiences that are unique and our own, and yet they're universal in a lot of ways. And they're all bringing us back to this connection that we're a part of something bigger than who we are. And I think, the analogy that you used, Red Hawk, about the ocean and the waves, if we're at this individual wave and we think we're out there all on our own, we're going to kind of do our own thing, right? And without regard to anything else that's in our way. And yet when we realize that we're part of this ocean and that when our wave crashes, it has an effect, then I think that's the whole idea that we're back. There are ripple effects. And I know these are kind of weird analogies here, but a little bit of cliche, but it's just, I kind of think of us as trying to figure out I've always tried to figure out what life is all about. Why are we here in the first place? And so if we are supposed to realize that we're part of something greater, then why these individual lives? And why, I as you can tell, it still perplexes me quite a bit. It's something that I struggle with and I wrestle with continually. what is that, the purpose of this individual life? And how does that affect the greater whole?
Yeah.
And, it's, yeah.
And that's, I think you set up a good relationship there. How does it affect the whole? And that might be the best metric we have right now. The Buddhist, I think Zen Buddhists call it Daishin, which means the big mind. And we're supposed to give up our small minds for the big mind. And I did some research on that word, and it's Japanese, and it means godparent. And I thought, that was a very friendly way of making me a part of it. You know what I mean? An extension of it. And I do think we are extensions of it. I think that our individuality and autonomy is provisional. And we forget that and think it belongs to me, when the fact is it's a gift to what I call me. And that what it really is, and I think you said it, Marianne, is so perplexing that it can take up a whole lifetime. And I think for the three of us, it pretty much has. and there's this connection, this place, when I started this, I thought consciousness, this journey, I thought consciousness was in my head. And you all, through stirring me up, have helped me see that consciousness is what's dancing between us. It's what binds us together. It's all the teachings we've been taught. It's all the yeses and nos and don't go this way, this is dangerous. All tens of thousands of those. Think about it, 83 trillion cells. Isn't that what I said at the beginning here? Something like that. 38 trillion cells. How many things have to go right to take one breath? And the fact is that breath is predicated by a trillion times a trillion other things that have to happen and go right. That's some connecting that is worthy of consciousness's time to make more clear how we can become more clearly a voice, a vehicle, and an embodiment of what is healthy and whole. And both of you, Bob, the whole concept of individuation or differentiation, that we have to pull away and get our own piece and own that. And that's a lifelong struggle for many. Before we can begin to see that we're a wave, there has to be, in my mind, some degree of differentiation and individuation. For the simple reason, it takes that to give you a sure footing that has some, security and balance within yourself, that you can begin asking those questions. And, Marianne, when you talked about why does anything happen, you have to be strong enough to be able to go to the roots and deep enough to see the ocean in you and not just get lost in the top of the wave. So there's a number of things that have to happen. And the reason we can even have this podcast is because the human family is getting to the point where we're seeing that, and where we're beginning to see our relation to the oneness. And we put it under the rubrics of environmental ecology. We put it under the rubrics of economics and resources. We put it under the rubrics of all these different things, but it's really about our relationship, all of us individuals, to this oneness of being, which is so abundant and so great and so full that we need to quit fighting over it. We need to focus more on the connective relationships that show that we are, and this is a huge word in this conversation, interdependent. There is no thread, including you or me, that is separate in reality from the oneness of it all. And this is popular knowledge. It used to be this was whispered by mystics in convents and in small groups, and the everyday people didn't want to hear it because they weren't ready to. I'm an everyday person, and I'm not only ready to hear it, I'm ready to be, and thank you for the word perplexed, to be perplexed with my friends.
It's It's interesting in that we have tried to be separate and we define ourselves as a unique individual and so forth. But it's those times in our life that are the either the very highs or the very lows in our life when we see the connection more clearly. Think of someone who is in an accident and needs blood. They have to connect with people they've never even met to get the blood that's going to keep them alive. Or on the other end of that spectrum, the joyous times when we celebrate certain things and we have our family around us and we have our friends around us. Those are the times when we feel more connected than any other time, the lows and the highs.
Amen.
And if we can find, again, I'll use my favorite word, we find the balance where we can find those connections all the time, not just in the lows and the highs.
And I think that's what this is a question of. It is a question of balance between my individuality, but the way I live has to somehow move closer and closer in accord with what we call health and wholeness. Marianne, what say you? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, we have those highs and lows, but there's a whole lot that happens in between all of that. And that's where the majority of our life is spent. It's in between those highs and lows. And so how do we bring this consciousness into those everyday encounters? How do we because we have to survive. We have to provide for our families. We have to eat. We have to have shelter. We have to take care of our physical needs because we do have physical needs. And so how do we bring these highs and lows and this interconnectedness into those everyday mundane encounters that take up the majority of our lives? And I think that's where the whole idea of knowing that you're connected in a way and yet you are separate in that you have to still provide for yourself, right? But in doing that, we're affecting everyone and everything around us.
Amen. And you know, for me, it's been a contextual change. I used to think, you know, doing the laundry was a chore, cooking was a chore, doing the dishes was a chore, vacuuming was a chore. And in the last few years, they've ceased to be chores and become meditations. They call my awareness to them in a way that I had not experienced before. The everydayness began to come through. And Thich Nhat Hanh talked about this in one of his books. You know, when you're doing the dishes, feeling the viscosity and really feeling it, being totally present. And it's amazing. I can slip into chore consciousness and I'll go, wow, this just became a chore, and I'll stop and I'll think what just happened. When what I'm doing, of all those chores or meditations, what I'm really doing is life. It's life. And when you start doing life, it's back to the three stone cutters. The first one, you know, every day he has to get up and he comes out and he cuts stones. Next guy's a little happier. Yeah, you know, we're building a building. And the third guy, he's in bliss. He says, we're building a church, man. This is awesome. You know, it's your context. It's what you're putting your moment into, and understanding that what I'm putting my moment into is not the moment, but as a context that is history in the making. And it's happening with every thought. Marianne, you've said this, that all the thoughts count. They all add up. Well, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and that is a perfect description of the individual. And then when you go to the grocery store and you encounter the clerk, or you go to the gas station and you encounter the attendant, or you walk down the street and you bump into somebody, then that becomes those connections, and bringing that same level of consciousness into those pieces. That's that connection. That's that fabric that we're a part of.
And you know, to develop an inner dialogue as well as an outer understanding that is the case, that we are part of something, that we are a voice, vehicle, and embodiment of something greater than what we call self. That self itself is serving something greater than the self. And that's the difference between selfishness and courage, is who do you serve? We see it on the battlefield. We see it on the playing field. We see it in everyday life of children who do amazing things. A little girl just got killed, 8-year-old shielding her younger sister in a drive-by shooting. Over and over, we see there is something greater than ourselves at play. And I pray that most people want to be a part of that. They want consciously and intentionally.
Well, that's part of conscious evolution. And it's when we develop those higher order feelings like empathy, where we actually feel better about ourselves when we're strengthening the connections to others. And the higher we evolve as an individual, the stronger those connections become.
And the word that entered my mind was the more authentic they become. I know people who belong to churches where everybody thinks alike. They say and they think, but no, they don't. They just aren't honest at a deeper level with all the nuances of their own experience and how they've created this self. That's part of a delusion. See, I think the self, when Buddha talks about the self not being real, this is what he's talking about, that the self is a process, and that process is integral and intimately connected, inextricably connected to everything else. It's not like we're connected like a wart on skin. We are connected like water in the ocean. It's that flowy together, and it's each of us are trying to manage that. What we call, I'm trying to be a good person. What people are saying is, I'm trying to use my life to do what's healthy for everybody, and what's fair for everybody. At least that's been my understanding of that.
Yeah, and I think that the whole idea that we are permeable and that we're flowing into each other, whether or not we're aware of it or not, and we can all feel it. You can walk into a room and you can feel the air. You can feel what's happening with those people in the room. Even if you don't identify it, it still will affect you. It will still have an impact on you. The more we can be aware of that, the more we can consciously choose the way we want to be in that flow. And I think that's where our individualness comes in. We do have the power to direct ourselves. We do have the power to choose. And sometimes we don't know that. We think that we have no choice. And we always have a choice. And even if it's just in the way we think and the way we frame things.
Yeah. And you said something to me that's so poetically, it'd be a great song, flowing into each other. I really like that understanding that language allows us to do that dance and poetry and art allows us to flow into each other in all these different dimensions, from the intellect all the way down to the endocrine system. It's quite amazing, these connective tissues that bond us together, which has to do with culture and art and nature and the way we express ourselves to each other and try to create a system of fairness, which we're in the middle of redoing. It's a difficult time, but it always has been. The good news is more of us are involved in this journey. We can talk about it out loud. It's not among whispers anymore. And I think that's really, really important. So we're coming to the end of our podcast time. Marianne, final comments?
I think this is such an important topic, and yet it's one that defies language. And I think you're absolutely right. It's art and poetry, and those are the ways that we can awaken ourselves and be able to take our consciousness to that next place, to where we act with intention, and then we understand that what happens after that is part of this great connection.
Yeah, amen. Bob, final comments?
Well, again, this idea that we have to come and find a balance between our individuality and our connectivity is the real dance that we're all. Dance involves being in balance and then throwing yourself out of balance so you can move to the next movement, and then finding your balance there, and then moving to the next movement and finding your balance there. And that seems to be the more we can realize that every one that we encounter and everything that we encounter is the universe that we're a part of. And that's when we begin to see others reflecting ourselves, and we begin to increase our feelings of connection to them and our empathy for the struggles that they have, because they're really reflecting our own struggles, our own questions. And the more we see the universe as being a mirror reflecting back on ourselves, the stronger we're able to make those connections.
Wow. And Bob, you really just said it without saying it, talking about the golden rule, letting each other in as if what we're letting in is us, is happening to us. And I think that's an important piece. It's interesting that I'm trying to get my, here we go. Let's see. There's this thing that kind of hovers over all our conversations. This piece that is both the source of most of our anxieties in life, but also a doorway, an opening to something new and fresh and creative. What I'm talking about is uncertainty. My gosh, that really bums me out when I can't plan. And I'll be honest, the older I get, the more uncertainty bugs me. I've got my own pattern. I'm kind of in my groove, man. I'm in my space. I got my house. I got my instruments. I got everything I really want and need. And something comes in and upsets that, and it's like, whoa. Or how about health stuff? As an old guy, new stuff's happening all the time, man. It really sucks. So I'm at the level now where I'm looking at my life and I'm pretty damn uncertain. However, as Justin Hayward said, the best part of life is its uncertainty, because it creates an opening. We're going to try to step through that opening next podcast. We hope you all have enjoyed today, and in all things, may the oneness of being infect your individuality in the name of whatever it is. Blessings.